My name is Clara Wren, 47 years old, an art restorer who spends her days breathing dust from centuries-old paintings and trying to mend cracks that time forgot. That morning, winter light pressed flat against the glass doors of St. Grace Hospital. I was pushing my husband's wheelchair. Ethan had suffered a mild stroke on the drive home. His skin looked the color of paper. His breath came in short, dry pulls. Inside the emergency bay, the smell of antiseptic hit me like cold metal. Nurses shouted codes I didn't understand. I handed over the insurance card with trembling fingers. It slipped from my grip, slid under the gurney, and I had to crouch to fetch it. My knees shook so hard I almost couldn't stand. When the door of the examination room opened, I heard a voice, low, steady, too familiar. "I'll take this case," the doctor said. Then, after the briefest pause, "Clara, it's been a long time." For a second, the hallway tilted. The sound of the heart monitor flattened into one unbroken tone. Dr. Adrian Hale, my first love. The man I once believed I would marry before I married someone safer. 25 years had passed, but I would have known that voice in a hurricane. He stood under the surgical lamp, the same tilt of the head, the same faint scar near his left eyebrow where I had once glued a butterfly bandage after a lab accident. Time had only sharpened him, his hair grayer, his eyes quieter, but the gravity he carried was the same. I froze in the doorway, one hand on the wheelchair handle, the other gripping my coat pocket where my phone vibrated endlessly. Ethan looked from him to me. "You two know each other?" My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I nodded before I could think. The air between us filled with the scent of alcohol wipes and something far older. Unfinished sentences, unburied heat. Adrian's gaze held mine just long enough for my stomach to twist. Then he turned to the nurses, issuing orders in that calm, surgical rhythm I used to love. I tried to focus on his words. "BP stable. Prepare IV. Possible transient ischemic attack." But all I could hear was the hum inside my own ears. Ethan's hand twitched on the armrest. "Clara," he said, forcing a smile, "seems like fate keeps bringing you into hospitals." His voice was light, but there was an edge to it I hadn't heard before. I wanted to answer, but the words scattered like glass on tile. I stared at the polished floor, watching the reflection of the fluorescent light tremble between my shoes. Every heartbeat hurt, every sound. The click of the stethoscope, the scrape of metal trays cut deeper. "We'll need to keep him overnight," Adrian told me, eyes flicking to my wedding band, then away. "He's lucky you got him here quickly." Lucky. The word landed wrong in my chest. I thanked him, my voice smaller than I intended. When he stepped closer to adjust the IV, I caught the faint scent of cedar soap. The same he used in the old dormitory shower where we once kissed between shifts. I gripped the handle of the wheelchair so tightly my knuckles went white. Ethan cleared his throat. "Doctor, my wife looks like she's seen a ghost." Adrian didn't answer right away. His stethoscope gleamed in the overhead light as he looped it around his neck, the silver chest piece brushing his collarbone. And that was when I realized. I was staring not at the man who had once loved me, but at the instrument around his neck, the very same model I'd given him before he left for England. The initials AH were still engraved at the rim. My breath caught. Adrian followed my gaze, and for a split second, something flickered across his face. Recognition? Guilt? Maybe both. Then he said softly, "I never replaced it." I wanted to ask why. Why he'd kept it. Why he was standing here, 25 years too late, holding the same object that once hung between us like a promise. But Ethan groaned, and the moment snapped. The nurses wheeled him toward the imaging room. I trailed behind, silent, the world dimming to the pulse in my ears. When the elevator doors closed, I saw our reflections in the metal. Ethan pale and frightened, Adrian focused, and me caught between them, as if trapped in an old photograph I didn't remember posing for. The antiseptic smell thickened. The lights hummed. And in that sterile silence I asked myself, which operation will be harder, saving my husband's heart or resuscitating the one I buried 25 years ago? I met Adrian Hale when I was 22. He was a final-year medical intern, and I was the youngest art restorer at the Metropolitan Museum Annex, working on cracked frescoes older than our names. He used to visit the museum's conservation lab every Friday, pretending to study pigment reactions for dermatology research. But I knew he just wanted to watch me mix colors under the lamp. One afternoon, I teased him, "You diagnose people. I diagnose walls." He laughed, tapping the edge of a broken frame. "Then, we're the same kind of fools, trying to save what's already dying." We promised, half-jokingly, that one day we'd open a studio together, healing what had fractured. I would mend paintings, he would mend people. But life has a cruel way of smudging promises. The year he was offered a fellowship in London, I couldn't afford a ticket to follow him. My father was sick, the rent overdue. He wrote letters, dozens of them, but I opened only the first. Inside, a single line, "Don't fix every crack, Clara. Some are meant to let the light in." I never answered. Instead, I married Ethan, the man who helped me pay for my father's funeral. He was kind at first, practical, solid. The kind of man who thought emotions were wasteful energy. When he proposed, he didn't bring flowers, just a spreadsheet. "Together, we'll have stability," he said. And I mistook stability for love. 20 years passed. I built a business restoring art for private collectors. Crumbling murals, oil portraits that smelled of mildew and secrets. I spent hours bent over fragments of someone else's beauty, my eyes stinging from turpentine, my fingers permanently stained the color of old varnish. My palms ache every winter. The joints in my thumbs are inflamed from precision work. Yet I paid for everything. Our son's 42,000 tuition, 6 years of medical bills for Ethan's mother, new floors for a house that never felt like mine. Sometimes, at the end of a long night, I'd find myself whispering to the paintings, "You're lucky, someone still thinks you're worth saving." But no one ever said that to me. Ethan built his own world golf trips, client dinners, the perpetual hum of men who like to hear themselves successful. I became the quiet figure who handled the background, the invisible restorer of everyone else's life. One evening, our son asked from the living room, "Mom, do you ever paint for yourself?" I smiled, wiping varnish from my fingertips. "No one restores themselves, sweetheart. We just keep others from falling apart." He nodded, too young to understand what that really meant. There is one thing I've never told anyone. In the far corner of my studio stands a tall oak cabinet, its door locked with a tiny brass key. Inside hangs a stethoscope, old and slightly tarnished, the gift Adrian gave me the day he left for England. He had placed it around my neck and said, half serious, "So you'll remember, listening is also a form of healing." I laughed then, saying it was absurd. "Artists don't need stethoscopes," he replied. "One day you'll realize, cracks don't just happen on canvas." For years, I've kept that stethoscope wrapped in muslin, hidden behind rows of solvent bottles. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I open the cabinet just to look at it. The metal feels colder each year, but when I touch it, I still hear a faint echo, like a memory of a heartbeat that doesn't belong to me anymore. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because it's the only thing I own that no one else has used, borrowed, or demanded. Maybe because part of me still needs proof that once, someone wanted to listen. The last decade has been a blur of restorations and receipts. I've cataloged more damage than joy, cracks spreading through marble saints, smoke scars on ceilings, mold on portraits of forgotten wives. Sometimes I wonder if the same decay has spread inside me, silent, invisible, but unstoppable. There are moments when the brush slips in my hand and a line of paint streaks across the surface. I always fix it, carefully blending tones until the scar disappears. But lately, I've begun to leave one imperfection behind, a barely visible line, thin as a hair. A secret reminder that not all damage needs erasing. Maybe that's what Adrian meant. The night before Ethan's collapse, I worked late at the studio. Rain rattled the windows, the fluorescent light buzzed overhead. I remember staring at a 17th century portrait. Its subject, a woman in pearls, her expression eternally patient. Her eyes seemed to ask, How long will you keep repairing what doesn't want to be saved? I didn't have an answer. Then my phone rang. Ethan's voice was faint, slurred. Clara, something's wrong with my arm. The world tilted. The brush fell, leaving a wet streak across the canvas. I grabbed my keys and ran. Now, less than 12 hours later, I'm standing in the same hospital where Adrian works, my past and present colliding under sterile light. Maybe that's why my hands shake, not just from fear, but from recognition. Because deep down, I know this isn't just about Ethan's failing heart. It's about the one I abandoned 25 years ago, still beating somewhere it shouldn't. The memory comes back the way light leaks through old glass, blurred at the edges but still warm. It was the summer of 1999, a heat wave that made the varnish on every painting sweat. I had just joined a restoration project at the St. Grace Chapel, a small church tucked behind the hospital's west wing. The fresco above the altar had cracked during a fire caused by a lightning strike. Adrian was assigned there too, helping as part of his medical rotation, checking for smoke inhalation among the volunteers. We spent entire afternoons under the vaulted ceiling, he with his first aid kit, I with my brushes and solvents. He was 25, sunburned, full of impossible certainty. I was 22, dizzy from turpentine and the way he said my name. That day, I stood on a wooden scaffold, gently cleaning soot off an angel's wing when a piece of the frame gave way. Adrian caught me before I fell, his arm around my waist, both of us breathless and laughing. The smell of ash and linseed oil hung between us. "You all right?" he asked, brushing dust from my shoulder. "Just startled," I said, trying to sound calm, though my pulse was a drumline. He smiled, pulled the stethoscope from around his neck, and, half teasing, placed the cold metal against my chest. "Your heart's racing faster than the cracks," he said. The words made me laugh then, too loud, too young. But now, decades later, I still hear that line echoing like a diagnosis I never understood. We worked side by side for 3 weeks, repairing what we could. He told me he wanted to specialize in cardiology, because every story starts with a pulse. I told him I liked restoring things because it's the only way I can pretend time isn't winning. One evening, the light through the chapel stained glass window turned the air gold. He held up a small fragment of the burned frame and said, "Look, charcoal still has memory. You can't see it, but it remembers the flame." I replied, half to him, half to myself, "Then maybe love does too." He looked at me then, really looked, and I felt something inside me shift. The night before the project ended, the fire alarm went off again, false this time. We sat outside on the church steps, eating sandwiches wrapped in newspaper. My hands were stained with blue pigment, his with iodine. He reached over, tracing one of the paint smudges on my wrist. "You know, Clara, in another life, we'd probably fix each other instead of everything else." I laughed, pretending not to hear what he really meant. We were both too careful, too young to believe that love could survive beyond geography or ambition. When he told me about his fellowship offer in London, I congratulated him like a professional. I even helped him pack folding his shirts, labeling his textbooks. He promised to write every week. Before he left, he handed me the stethoscope, the same one he had used that summer. "For the next time you forget what a heartbeat sounds like," he said. I joked, "What am I supposed to do with this?" "Listen," he said, "not just to others, to yourself." He leaned in, pressed a quick kiss on my temple, and walked away before I could say anything that might keep him. The next morning, the mailman delivered his first letter. The envelope was cream, the handwriting steady and dark. I held it for hours before tearing it open. Inside, one page. "Don't fix every crack, Clara. Some are meant to let the light in." My hands shook. I folded the letter back without finishing the second page. I told myself I was too busy, too young, too afraid of what might follow if I let the words sink in. I placed the letter inside the oak cabinet where I kept my restoration tools, next to the stethoscope. Then I locked the door and threw away the key. For years, I pretended those things didn't exist, buried under bills, under Ethan's career, under motherhood and fatigue. But now, standing in the same hospital where that chapel used to be, I can almost smell the burnt wood again. The same light falls through the window in the waiting room, fractured into gold and dust. And I realize something that stings like turpentine in a cut. The sound that haunts me after all these years isn't his voice or his laughter. It's the echo of that stethoscope against my chest. The proof that once, my heart knew how to be loud. That summer left no scars on my skin, but it branded something deeper. The memory of a heartbeat that refused to quiet down, no matter how much life tried to silence it. I laughed then, not knowing that one day that sound would follow me into a hospital room, 25 years later, and remind me of everything I had tried so hard to restore, except myself. After Adrian's reappearance, the air inside our house changed texture heavier somehow, as if even the walls were listening. Ethan began to linger near my studio door more often. He said he was checking the thermostat, but his eyes always landed on my phone, my bag, the unfinished paintings stacked against the wall. At dinner, he'd scroll through his wine app in silence, then suddenly ask questions that felt rehearsed. "So," he said one night, cutting his steak too cleanly, "how long have you known this doctor?" "Since before we met," I answered. "Before we met," he repeated, letting the knife rest. Now fate brings him back. How poetic. The sarcasm clinked louder than the silverware. He smiled without looking at me. "Does he have something I don't? The coat? The degree? Or maybe you just miss being someone's patient?" I didn't reply. The clock above the kitchen sink ticked like a metronome for the tension between us. I reached for my glass of water and realized my hand was shaking. "Ethan," I said quietly, "it's just coincidence." "There's no such thing," he said. "Coincidence is what guilty people call timing." The words slid across the table like a blade. That night, I stayed late at the studio, hoping paint and silence would steady me. But when I came home, the door to the oak cabinet was open. The key hidden for 20 years was on the floor. Inside, the old stethoscope lay coiled like a sleeping snake. Ethan stood beside it, holding the other half of the memory I thought I'd locked away. "So this is it?" he asked. "Well, your little souvenir," I tried to explain. "It's nothing. Just an old gift." He lifted it by the tubing, letting the metal disc spin, catching the light. "Funny, I thought you hated hospitals." "I do," I said. "Then why keep this?" I didn't have an answer. His laugh was low, unfamiliar. "You women are strange. You call it nostalgia, I call it weakness." Then he dropped the stethoscope. The sound was small but sharp metal meeting tile. Memory meeting gravity. "Grow it away," he said. "He's the past. You live with me now." I watched him walk out, leaving the door ajar and the air colder. I stood there for a long time, staring at the thing on the floor. The room smelled of varnish and something bitter, like old smoke. When I finally knelt to pick it up, the tubing felt colder than I remembered. The chest piece had a tiny dent from the fall, as if even metal had flinched from being caught between two lives. In that moment, I understood something cruel and clear. Ethan didn't just want me to throw away a relic. He wanted me to erase proof that I'd ever had a pulse of my own. I pressed the disc to my palm, just once. It was absurd, but I swore I could feel it. An echo, faint but real. Maybe hearts don't forget the frequency that first woke them. So I wrapped the stethoscope in its muslin cloth again and placed it back in the cabinet. But this time, I didn't lock it. At breakfast the next morning, Ethan acted as if nothing had happened. He read the paper, commented on the weather, mentioned our son's grades. But every normal word landed wrong, like a note out of tune. When he reached across the table to refill my coffee, I flinched without meaning to. He noticed. His smile tightened. "Relax," he said softly. "I'm not the enemy." The way he said it made me certain that he already was. I looked at him then. Not the husband I'd built a life with, but a man who couldn't stand that something in me might still beat beyond his reach. Outside, the wind knocked a branch against the window. The sound was steady, rhythmic like a heart stubbornly refusing to stop. And I realized, as I bent to retrieve the newspaper he'd dropped, that the thing I was truly picking up wasn't paper or even the stethoscope from last night. I wasn't lifting an object, I thought. I was lifting the old rhythm I'd buried, the proof that somewhere inside, I still had my own heartbeat. The day after Ethan's tests began, the hospital room smelled like bleach and static. The blinds were half closed, cutting the sunlight into strips across the sheets. I stood by the window, holding my sketchbook, the one I always carried when I couldn't breathe. Adrian entered with his clipboard and that same quiet confidence, followed by two nurses. He checked Ethan's vitals, adjusted the IV line, then glanced briefly at me. "Your husband's progress is good," he said. "With rest and medication, he should recover fully." Ethan gave a short laugh. "Guess I got lucky, huh?" "Yes," Adrian replied evenly, "very lucky." There was a pause, heavy but not hostile, until Ethan asked, still half joking, "So, Doc, how do you know my wife? She looked like she'd seen a ghost when you walked in." "Happened to be." The room went still. I felt the nurses glance up, waiting. Adrian hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "We met years ago. Only at St. Grace Chapel. She once saved my life." Ethan frowned. "Saved your life?" Adrian nodded. "There was a fire during a restoration project. I was trapped behind the scaffolding, smoke everywhere. Clara went back inside to get me out before the roof caved in. If she hadn't, I wouldn't be standing here." Silence thickened. The monitor beside Ethan's bed beeped in slow, methodical rhythm. "She never mentioned that," Ethan said, voice tight. "She wouldn't," Adrian replied, a small, sad smile tugging at his mouth. She never wanted credit." I wished he hadn't said it. The air shifted, as though someone had opened a door to a storm. Ethan's eyes found mine, sharp, calculating. He laughed once, too loudly. "Well, how noble. Guess we're even now." "She saved you, and I've been saving her ever since." "Ethan," I started, but he cut me off. "You think I don't know, Clara? The late nights, the phone you hide under your coat, the way you say his name like it still tastes good?" The nurses exchanged looks. Adrian's jaw clenched. "That's enough," he said firmly. "No, doctor," Ethan spat. The word doctor like poison. "Let's be honest. My wife's a rescuer. She collects broken men. First you, now me. Guess I'm just the one she decided to keep alive long enough to pay the bills." I felt the world tilt. My throat burned, but I couldn't move. "Ethan, stop," I whispered. "Why, you embarrassed?" His tone turned cold, surgical. "You want to play saint in front of your miracle doctor? Go ahead. Tell him how you funded this whole family. Tell him how you like to fix things so you don't have to admit you're one of them." Adrian took a step forward. "Mr. Wren." "Don't," Ethan snapped. "Don't you dare act like you understand us. You had your chance 25 years ago. Now she's mine." He turned to me, eyes hard. "You hear that, Clara? You owe me. Every bill, every house payment, every night I didn't walk out, those are my rescues. So don't you stand there acting like you saved anyone." The monitor beeped faster now, matching the rhythm in my ears. The nurses murmured, tried to calm him, but his voice kept rising, jagged and furious. "You owe me, Clara." Adrian's hand came down on the power button of the monitor, silencing the sound. For a second, the room was completely still. Just the faint hum of fluorescent light and the echo of that word. "Owe." Something in me cracked. Not loudly. Not visibly. It was the kind of break that doesn't make a sound, but changes the architecture of everything inside. I stepped closer to the bed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, I don't owe you my life. I gave it to you." He blinked, confused. "And now," I added, "I'm taking it back." He opened his mouth to reply, but Adrian interrupted softly. "We need to monitor your heart rate. Please lie back." Ethan glared at him but obeyed, turning away from me. His hand twitched near the railing. The veins in his wrist pulsed under the skin, pale and frantic. I turned toward the window, trying to breathe. The reflection in the glass showed 3 people. A man trying to control everything, another trying to heal it, and a woman realizing she no longer wanted to be saved by either. Behind me, the monitor started again. Beep, beep, beep. each note sharp as a blade, slicing the room into smaller, quieter pieces. And in that cold, rhythmic sound, I understood something I'd never dared to before. For the first time, I thought, my heart isn't in my chest anymore. It's on the table, open, exposed, waiting to decide who gets to touch it next. I left the room without another word. Outside, the hallway lights flickered. A nurse passed, humming softly. The scent of alcohol swirled around me. I pressed a hand to my sternum, half expecting to feel an incision. But there was only stillness, and beneath it, the faintest echo of a pulse I couldn't name. That night, the city outside my studio was sleepless, rain slicing the windows like thin glass threads. Inside, the only light came from the restoration lamp hovering over a ruined painting. Kitty of the cracks. The canvas was fractured down the center, a spiderweb of fissures crawling across the Virgin's face. I had been working on it for weeks, patching layer after layer, trying to hide the damage that fire and smoke had done. But tonight I couldn't. The cracks stared back at me, merciless. Foth. I set down my brush. The smell of linseed oil clung to my skin. My reflection in the metal lamp was warped, half woman, half ghost. Ethan's words from the hospital still echoed in my head. You owe me, Clara. You owe me everything. For 20 years I had believed that love meant debt, that marriage meant penance. I had given my hands, my time, my pulse, and somewhere along the way I had signed over the deed to my own existence. I walked to the desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the transfer record. 4,300 in automatic payments each month for Ethan's treatment plan and insurance. The cursor blinked, waiting. My heart pounded the way it used to before unveiling a restored painting, part fear, part clarity. I hovered over the confirm button that would renew his coverage, then closed the tab instead. End transfer. A small box popped up on the screen. Are you sure you want to cancel this transaction? I pressed yes. It was absurd how quiet the click sounded. Such a tiny sound for something that felt like detonating a life. I wrote a message to the billing office, my fingers trembling only once. To whom it may concern. Please suspend all recurring transfers under the name Clara Wren, effective immediately. C. W. Then I opened a new email, this one addressed to Ethan. For a long time I just stared at the blank page. Then the words came, not rehearsed, not angry, just true. Ethan. From now on, I will not restore what others have broken. Not your health, not our marriage, not the illusion that debt is devotion. Whatever you think I owe you, I've already paid. With my youth, my hands, and the years I can't get back. You once said I was addicted to fixing things. Maybe you're right. But tonight I'm finally choosing what deserves repair, and it isn't you. I hit send. The email whooshed into the void. For a moment, I thought I might collapse. But then, the silence around me settled differently. Not as suffocation, but as space. I turned back to Madonna of the Cracks. Under the lamp, the Virgin's eyes seemed to look at me differently now. Not pleading, but knowing. I ran a finger over one of the longest fractures running across her cheek. The fissure shimmered faintly in the light, like lightning caught in paint. For years, my job had been to erase such marks, to blend them away until no one could tell that time had once dared to touch beauty. But tonight, I left the cracks as they were. Maybe scars weren't flaws. I reached for the stethoscope from the cabinet, the one Adrian had given me. I hadn't touched it since Ethan threw it on the floor. The tubing still bore the faint dent from the fall. I placed the metal chest piece against the center of my palm. Cold, heavy, real. Then, without knowing why, I placed it against my chest. No patients. No monitors. No witnesses. Just me, listening. The sound came slowly. A soft thump, 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 uneven at first, then steady. I exhaled, tears blurring the edges of the room. I don't want anyone to save me, I whispered into the quiet. I just need to know if I still have a real pulse. It wasn't a declaration. It was a diagnosis. The rain outside grew heavier. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang midnight. I cleaned my brushes mechanically, though I knew I wouldn't be working again tonight. On the wall hung dozens of restored paintings. landscapes, portraits, forgotten saints, all resurrected through my labor. But none of them looked alive to me anymore. For the first time, I wanted to create something unhealed. I took a new canvas from the shelf, stretched it over the frame, and painted a single dark line across the middle one unbroken crack. That was all. No correction, no blending, just a wound, visible and honest. When the paint dried, I signed it with my initials. C. W. Letters I hadn't used on any of my work in years. It was ugly, raw, perfect. The next morning, I sent a message to my assistant. Studio closed until further notice. Then I took the painting and leaned it against the window. The first light of dawn crept in, touching the surface like a benediction. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a restorer. Like a person. The days that followed felt like walking through frost. Ethan spoke less, moved slower, and when he did speak, his words were measured, like a man calculating interest, not love. He spent most of his time in the living room pretending to read, though I could see his phone screen reflected in his glasses. Emails, spreadsheets, private calls. When I entered the room, he'd swipe it dark. Our son, Michael, began to avoid me too. Once, he used to help in the studio, handing me brushes and asking about pigments. Now, he barely looked up from his laptop. His laughter, once warm, had turned brittle. "You're working too hard again, Mom," he said one evening, not meeting my eyes. "I'm just finishing some commissions." "You should rest. Dad says the stress isn't good for you." He left the room before I could ask what that meant. That night, the house felt wrong, too quiet, too clean. I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs for water. From the hallway, I heard voices. Ethan's tone was low, clipped, Michael's, uneasy. I stopped before reaching the doorway. "It's not stealing if it's for family," Ethan said. "But it's her name on the lease," Michael whispered. "Mom will notice. By the time she does, it'll be done. We need that money. The studio's insured. She won't be out on the street." There was a pause, then the rustle of paper. "We'll list it quietly first. I know a buyer through the clinic. Once the sale's approved, she can't reverse it." My throat went dry. They were talking about my studio, my only space that was truly mine. Michael hesitated. "Dad, maybe we should just ask her." "You think she'll agree?" "She's unstable, son. Emotional. We're doing this for her." I felt the words land like blows. Unstable. Emotional. I could almost see the narrative being built. Brick by brick, without me. Stepped into the room. The conversation died instantly. Ethan's hand froze over a folder of documents. Michael's face went pale. "Don't stop on my account," I said. My voice was calm, almost too calm. Ethan leaned back, recovering fast. "Clara, we were just talking logistics. You know how expensive treatment is. So expensive you'd sell the only thing I built?" He sighed. "It's not like that. You're overreacting." He reached for the folder, but I got there first. The pages inside were real estate forms, already filled out with my signature copied, not written. My breath caught. "You forged my name." "I protected you," he corrected. "You should be thanking me." In me went still. The quiet was worse than shouting. Even the air seemed to hesitate. From the edge of the coffee table, the old stethoscope, which Ethan had thrown weeks ago and I'd unknowingly left there, rolled forward and dropped. The chest piece hit the wood with a sharp click, spinning once before lying flat. None of us moved. The sound was so precise, so final, it could have been the second hand of a clock marking the start of something irreversible. Michael whispered, "Mom," but I didn't look at him. My eyes stayed on the stethoscope. "You know," I said quietly, "that sound. It's what a heart makes right before it stops." Ethan scoffed, trying to mask the tremor in his hands. "Don't be dramatic." "You've mistaken silence for surrender," I said. Then I picked up the stethoscope, set it gently on the table between us, and walked away. Behind me, neither of them spoke. Upstairs, I stood by the window, watching the faint reflection of myself against the glass. Outside, the streetlights flickered like fading pulse lines. I could feel it, the shift before a storm when everything holds its breath. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for certain. If they were writing my ending, they'd chosen the wrong author. And somewhere beneath that silence, a plan, small, sharp, and inevitable, began to take shape. The next morning, the air in the house had the stillness of anesthesia. Too clean, too quiet, too false. When I came downstairs, Ethan was already dressed in his suit, the same one he wore when he wanted to look respectable. Michael sat at the table, eyes fixed on his phone. A third man stood beside them, flipping through a folder with the detached calm of someone used to cutting lives into paperwork. "Clara," Ethan said without looking up, "this is Mr. Coleman. He'll help us with the transfer." "Transfer?" I repeated, though the word had already formed its own shadow in my stomach. He gestured to the stack of papers. "Legal technicalities. Ownership transfer for the studio, so I can manage the insurance, the property taxes, all that nonsense. You know how bad you are with numbers." Mr. Coleman smiled politely, tapping the page marked "Transfer of Ownership. Studio Clara Wren. Yearly procedural, Mrs. Wren. Your husband simply wants to protect your assets during this difficult time." I took the top sheet, scanning the lines. My name appeared 3 times, each followed by a blank line waiting for my signature. The room smelled of coffee and ink, ordinary, almost mercifully so. Then I saw the clause at the bottom. "All creative and financial rights to the studio shall be transferred to Mr. Bist. Ethan Wren." The rest of the world blurred. Ethan leaned forward, pen in hand. "Come on, Clara. Let's not make this dramatic. Just sign. You know I'll handle it." I looked at him then. Not the man I'd married, but the one who'd spent years calling his control care. "You mean you'll own it?" I said. "It's just paperwork," he replied, his voice coated in honey. "You'll still work there, obviously. Nothing changes." "Everything changes when you put your name where mine used to be." His smile faltered. "You're overthinking again. You've been under stress since that doctor showed up." "Don't," I said quietly. The lawyer cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Perhaps we can all take a moment." "No," Ethan interrupted, eyes never leaving mine. "She's fine. She just needs direction." Direction. The same word he'd used years ago when I'd asked for a weekend off. "You need direction, Clara." As if I were a project, not a person. I placed the paper flat on the table, smoothing the creases with my fingers. Then I looked at Michael. "Jaime, you knew about this?" He hesitated. "Dad said it was temporary. To help with the bills." "Whose bills?" I asked. "Mine or his?" The silence was answer enough. "Clara," Ethan said softly, that patronizing tone he used with clients. "You're late. I'm doing this for you. You can keep your art, your little hobbies. I just want to make sure everything's safe." "Safe," I repeated. "That's what people say before locking the door from the outside." His hand tightened around the pen. "You're not thinking straight. You canceled my transfers. You could have ruined everything." "I stopped paying for my own captivity," I said. "That's not ruin. That's release." The lawyer shuffled, uneasy. "Maybe I should come back later." "No," Ethan snapped. "We'll finish this now." He pushed the pen toward me, the metal clattering against the table. "Sign it." I stared at the pen, then at him. My pulse was steady now, too calm to be fear. "You once told me love was care," I said. "That loving someone meant taking responsibility for them." "Exactly." "But you never asked," I said, "whose lungs you were breathing through." They blinked, confused. "What are you talking about? You've been living off my oxygen for 20 years, Ethan. My work, my patience, my silence. And you called it marriage?" I took the papers in both hands and began to tear. Slowly, deliberately. The sound was small but final. Fiber surrendering to force. Michael stood up. "Mom, sit down," I said without raising my voice. Piece by piece, I tore the contract until it was nothing but white confetti. The lawyer's mouth opened in protest, but Ethan's silence was louder than any shout. His jaw clenched, the vein at his temple pulsing. "You're being irrational," he hissed. "No," I said. "I'm being precise. That's what I do. I restore what's real and remove what's false. Today, that's you." He rose from his chair, the pen still in his hand like a weapon. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Linnally, I said. Yes. He laughed once, a dry, bitter sound. You think you can survive without me? You don't even understand the bills, the taxes, the clients. Then I'll learn, I cut in. At least this time, the knowledge will belong to me. I reached for the stethoscope on the sideboard. It had been sitting there since the night before, a relic among the mail and unpaid invoices. I held it up, the metal cold against my fingers. You know, I said quietly, you've spent years trying to measure my heart like a patient's chart, pressing, diagnosing, deciding what's healthy for me. But here's the thing, Ethan. You've been listening to the wrong pulse. He sneered. And what's that supposed to mean? I'm keeping this, I said, holding up the stethoscope. Not to hear your heart, not to listen for your approval, but to remind myself that I still have a rhythm you can't chart. The lawyer gathered his briefcase awkwardly. Perhaps we should reschedule. You'll do no such thing, I told him. Those papers are void. If you submit them, I'll file for fraud. Ethan took a step forward, voice low. Careful, Clara. You're making enemies you can't afford. I already afforded you, I said. You cost me everything that mattered. And now the account's closed. For a moment, we stood facing each other across the wreckage of paper. The life we'd built, reduced to shreds between us. Michael whispered, Dad. But Ethan didn't move. His face twisted, not in anger, but in disbelief. The shock of a man watching his favorite possession come alive. We're really leaving? He asked finally. No, I said. You are. And with that, I turned and opened the front door. Outside, the morning was blinding. Sunlight spilled over the threshold, sharp and white, like the sterile light of a surgical lamp. Ethan hesitated. For a second, I almost saw the man I'd once loved, the one who had made me laugh in broken kitchens, who had promised me calm. But then he looked past me, toward the studio visible through the window, and whatever softness remained in him calcified. He walked out. The lawyer followed, wordless. Michael lingered for a moment, torn between us. Mom, he said quietly, Dad's sick. He needs help. So did I said. But no one noticed. He looked away. Then he left too. When the door closed, I let the silence fill every corner. Dust floated in the light, settling over the torn papers. My knees went weak, but not from fear, from the sudden absence of weight. I set the stethoscope on the table, pressed the disc lightly against the wooden surface. Beneath it, the vibration of the refrigerator, the faint hum of electricity, sounds of life continuing, indifferent. I smiled. I choose to keep it, I whispered, not to listen for his heart, but to hear mine again. I placed the stethoscope around my neck. The metal was cold, grounding, like armor. Outside, the first gust of wind lifted the torn fragments from the doorstep, scattering them into the street. Each piece spun once in the light, then vanished, and just like that, the house exhaled. For the first time in 20 years, the house was mine, and yet it sounded emptier than ever. Those were new. No footsteps, no forced dinners, no cautious laughter over dry wine. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of paper beneath my shoes. I thought the silence would bring peace. It didn't. It brought the storm. 3 days later, the messages began. At first, they were subtle. A text from a friend. Clara, are you okay? Heard something about a breakdown? Then a call from the museum curator I'd worked with for a decade. I think it's best if we postpone your upcoming exhibit, just until things settle down. Settle down? I asked, confused. There are concerns, she said carefully. Ethan's post is everywhere. I'm sorry. I opened my phone. There it was. A post from Ethan Wren, time-stamped less than an hour after he walked out. It breaks my heart to share this, but Clara's been struggling emotionally for years. I've done everything I can to protect her and her studio, but she's refused help. Please, if you know her, be kind. She's not well. Below it were comments dripping with pity and poison. Poor woman, she always seemed unstable. He's such a devoted husband. Imagine what he's endured. Artists, you know how they are. Temperamental. The words crawled across the screen like insects. By morning, the story had spread. A lifestyle blogger reposted it with the caption, "When genius meets madness." My inbox flooded with cancellations, private clients withdrawing commissions, galleries re-evaluating future collaborations. The museum where I had worked since I was 25 issued a polite email. Due to concerns regarding recent public allegations, we regret to inform you that our restoration partnership will be suspended indefinitely. I read it twice, then laughed. A quiet, sharp sound that surprised even me. So this was his plan. He couldn't win the argument, so he would rewrite the narrative. It was the same tactic he'd always used, just on a grander stage. Make me doubt my own stability, until everyone else did too. A week later, I went to buy varnish from the art supply store I'd frequented for years. The cashier, who used to greet me with smiles, froze when he saw me. "You're Clara Wren, right?" he asked carefully. "Last I checked. I read about you online. They said you were in treatment?" "They also said Van Gogh mailed his ear to a lover," I said. "People believe whatever makes them feel superior." He didn't laugh. He just rang up the order, avoiding eye contact. Outside, I passed 2 former students whispering. One of them muttered, "She looks normal," and I couldn't help thinking, that's the problem, isn't it? Normal doesn't sell as well as tragic. By the end of the month, I was persona non grata in my own field. My clients ghosted me. My accountant called to say a tax audit had been filed anonymously. My landlord for the studio said someone had warned him I was financially unstable. Everywhere I turned, Ethan's fingerprints lingered. He didn't need to scream or threaten. He just needed to plant seeds and let polite society water them. Even Michael had gone quiet. He answered my calls with one-word replies. "Are you with your father?" "Yeah." "He's behind this, you know." "Mom, please don't start." "Start what? The truth?" He sighed. "Dad says you're paranoid." I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. I began to document everything. Screenshots, emails, timestamps. The years of restoring art had taught me precision, patience. Now, I turned those skills on my own life. Each night, I sat in the studio, printing out every message and pinning them to a corkboard like piecing together a crime scene. Which, in a way, it was. But amid the chaos, something unexpected happened. I stopped being afraid. There's a freedom that comes after public ruin. Once the world believes you've fallen, there's nowhere left to hide and nowhere left to fall. I'd lost my contracts, my reputation, my marriage. And yet, when I looked at my hands, still stained with paint, still steady, I realized Ethan hadn't taken the one thing he wanted most: control. One night, I scrolled through his feed again. Comments had shifted. The sympathy posts were fading, replaced by curiosity. A few women had replied under his message. "Strange. He said the same about his ex before. Anyone notice how fast he moved on after the divorce?" I smiled. The internet was fickle. It loved a victim until a better one came along. Still, I knew this wasn't over. Men like Ethan don't stop when they're ignored, they escalate when they're not believed. That escalation came in the form of a letter, delivered by courier. It was from a law firm representing the Wren family trust. Something I hadn't known existed. They were filing for power of attorney on medical grounds, claiming I was unfit to manage personal or financial affairs. Attached was a forged psychiatrist's note, diagnosing me with acute emotional dysregulation. At the bottom, the signature read, "Dr. Adrian Hale." For a moment, the room tilted. My heart stuttered, then steadied. It wasn't Adrian's handwriting. I knew that immediately. His signature looped differently. The H slanted to the right, not down. Someone had copied it, badly. Still, the damage was done. The letter looked real enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. I sat there, staring at the paper, until laughter bubbled out of me. Quiet, bitter, unstoppable. So that was it. The final move. Destroy my credibility by turning the man who once saved me into my accuser. It was elegant, I had to admit. Cruel but elegant. And yet, beneath the bitterness, I felt something else. A kind of savage calm. Because now I had proof. A forged signature, a fake diagnosis, a trail of messages connecting Ethan to every smear. And suddenly, I wasn't the hunted anymore. That night, I opened the oak cabinet again. The stethoscope was still there, coiled neatly, gleaming faintly under the lamplight. I placed it around my neck, not as nostalgia, but as armor. The chest piece rested cold against my collarbone, right above the steady pulse that refused to quit. "You can't destroy what listens," I murmured. In the reflection of the window, I saw myself, tired, yes, but unbroken. Outside, thunder rolled low across the horizon. The air smelled like copper and rain. The storm had found its way back. And for the first time, I welcomed it. The hospital corridors always smelled the same, antiseptic and silence. I was there to pick up Ethan's discharge papers. That was the story I told myself. But in truth, I wanted to see if his name still sat on the patient board, if he was still receiving the attention he craved more than recovery itself. While I waited near the nurse's station, two of them spoke in low voices behind the counter. They didn't see me standing there, half hidden by a stack of clipboards. "Did you hear? Mr. Wren's been trying to get his wife's records released," one whispered. His wife? I thought that was confidential. He told the administrator. It's for a legal case, something about proving she's unstable. He even said a journalist was willing to publish it. That's insane. Isn't Dr. Hale her attending physician? Apparently he already signed off. The paperwork went through yesterday. The words hit me like cold water. My pulse roared in my ears. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" They froze, color draining from their faces. "Mrs. Wren, sorry, it's confidential. We shouldn't have. You said Dr. Hale signed off. On my file?" The taller nurse hesitated, then nodded. "That's what the record says." I thanked her automatically and walked away, though I couldn't feel my legs. My vision blurred at the edges. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead, sterile and white. At the records department, I asked for a copy of my medical file. The clerk, an older woman with glasses slipping down her nose, gave me a sympathetic look. "You'll need to sign a request form." My hand shook as I scrawled my name. The paper looked too thin to hold the weight of what I suspected. She disappeared into the archive room and returned 10 minutes later with a slim folder. "Here you go. Please return it when you're done." I sat on a plastic chair and opened it. The first few pages were routine, annual checkups, allergy notes. Then, halfway through, I saw it. A new page added recently, dated 2 months ago. Diagnosis: acute emotional dysregulation, recommended treatment. Psychiatric observation, long-term therapy signed. Dr. Adrian Hale. I stared at the signature until the letters blurred. My throat went dry. My body forgot how to breathe. For a moment, I believed it. After all, wasn't that the story everyone was already telling? The fragile wife, the erratic artist, the woman who lost control. Then training. Years of noticing microscopic details kicked in. The ink tone was wrong. The hospital used black archival ink. This was navy. The font in the printed header didn't match the older pages. And there, at the bottom, the red seal crooked by 2 degrees to the right. Adrian would never misalign a hospital seal. He was meticulous, almost obsessive. And the handwriting? His capital. H, always looped upward like a breath. This one slanted down. Someone had forged his name. My shock turned to something else, sharp, electric. I marched down the hall to his office. The door was slightly ajar, the scent of coffee and paper filling the space. Adrian looked up from his desk, surprised. "Clara, are you okay?" I tossed the file onto his table. The pages slid open, revealing the forged signature like a wound. "Did you sign this?" He frowned, scanning the page. Then his eyes widened. "No." "Where did you get this?" "From records. They said it was approved yesterday." He stood, jaw tightening. This isn't my handwriting. Look, see the spacing between the letters? And the seal? Jesus, they didn't even use the right ink. Ethan's behind it, I said. My voice was steady now. Too calm. He's feeding the press, trying to prove I'm unstable. He's using your name to make it official. Adrian ran a hand through his hair. That's illegal. He can't. Clara, this is criminal falsification. And convenient, I added. He knows no one will question it if your signature's on it. You're the credible witness, I'm just the hysterical wife. He looked at me for a long moment, then exhaled. Let me handle this. I'll request an internal audit, get the logs for whoever accessed your file. No, I said. He'll see it coming. I want to see where this trail leads first. Adrian hesitated. You're not planning to confront him alone? I'm done confronting. I'm collecting. He studied me, then nodded slowly. Be careful. He's not playing fair. Neither am I said. Not anymore. I left his office and walked through the hospital garden, a small rectangle of green between two concrete wings. Rain had just ended. Drops clung to the roses like glass beads. I sat on a bench, the folder on my lap. My hands still trembled, but not from fear, now, from purpose. Ethan thought he'd written my diagnosis. He didn't realize he'd written his own confession instead. I slipped the forged page out of the file and folded it neatly. The paper was smooth under my fingertips, fragile but dangerous, like a blade made of glass. When I looked up, the sky was a bruised gray, the kind that promised more storms. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang from the chapel tower. I pressed the folder to my chest, right over my heart, feeling the steady rhythm beneath. You wanted proof I'm unwell, I whispered. Here it is. Too sane for your comfort. Then I stood and walked back toward the main wing, the echo of my footsteps, calm, deliberate, certain. I found Adrian in his office after hours. The lights were dimmed, the blinds drawn, his desk buried under medical charts. He looked up when I entered, surprise flickering across his face before it hardened into concern. Clara, he said softly, you shouldn't be here this late. You signed my file, I said. He froze, then stood slowly as if I'd just accused him of murder. No, I didn't. Then someone forged your name and they used it to label me unstable. He walked around the desk, closing the door behind me. Show me. I handed him the forged document. He studied it under the lamp, the light carving deep lines across his face. This isn't mine, he said. Different ink, wrong format. Whoever did this had access to our system, though. They copied my digital signature. Ethan, I said. He has connections. He's been grooming this narrative for months. Adrian exhaled slowly, his voice tightening. He's building a legal case. If he files this publicly, the court could strip your rights, claim you're not fit to manage finances. Then we need proof before he does. He met my eyes, steady and sure. If you want the truth, I can get it. The original file? The one in the hospital server. But I'll need a reason to access it without raising flags. I'll give you one, I said. A show. Public, loud enough to drown him out. That night, we sat in the hospital cafe, the two of us hunched over napkins like conspirators. The hum of vending machines filled the silence between our words. Ethan's been invited to speak at the St. Grace Charity Gala next month, I told him. He's giving a talk on mental health awareness in creative industries. Ian's brow furrowed, joking. No, he's using my story, our story, to sell himself as a savior. Then that's where it ends, he said quietly. We outlined it piece by piece, like restoring a shattered fresco. Adrian would retrieve the authentic copy of my medical record, verified and time-stamped in the hospital system. I would create a new artwork, something undeniable, a fusion of truth and proof. Together, we'd unveil both at the gala, in front of donors, journalists, and half the city's art elite. The same audience Ethan adored. I remember the exact words Adrian said before we parted that night. This isn't revenge, Clara. It's correction. You mean restoration, I corrected him. He smiled faintly. You really can't stop thinking in pigments, can you? No, I said, because truth, like color, only fades if you stop exposing it to light. Back in my studio, the world outside slept while I worked. The painting I began wasn't on canvas, but on tempered glass, a medium that caught and reflected light like skin under a stethoscope's metal disc. I called it Pulse. I wanted it to breathe. Using MRI scans Adrian had printed for me, images of a healthy human heart in motion. I layered pigment mixed with silver dust and varnish, tracing each contraction like brushstrokes of survival. Under ultraviolet light, the veins glowed faintly crimson, pulsing as if alive. Each night I painted, I imagined Ethan's face the moment he realized the art he'd tried to erase had become evidence. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using the very tools of restoration, transparency, layering, precision, to expose the rot he'd hidden beneath polish. A week later, Adrian came by after midnight, his scrubs still on. He carried a small envelope sealed with hospital insignia. "This is it," he said, placing it on the table. "Your real file. No diagnosis, no notes, just clean vitals." I pulled the system logs. The forged one was uploaded from an external account tied to Ethan's Charity Foundation email. I stared at the envelope like it might burn through the wood. "You realize?" I whispered. "This could ruin him." "He's already ruined himself," Adrian said. "You're just making it visible." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Clara, this event, are you sure you're ready for what comes after? This won't just clear your name. It'll end his." I smiled, tired but certain. "I'm not restoring the man. I'm restoring the record." He studied me for a long moment. "You've changed." "No," I said. "I've just stopped fixing the wrong things." The following days passed in a quiet fever. Invitations arrived for the gala, printed on heavy cream paper with gold edges. My name appeared under featured artist. Clara Wren, special installation. Ethan's beneath it, keynote speaker. The psychology of creativity. Perfect symmetry. Perfect trap. I rehearsed my part in the mirror, every word, every breath. I'd stand beside Pulse, let the crowd see the reflection of their own faces in its glass surface, and then, when Ethan began his speech about supporting vulnerable women, I'd switch the light. The heart would glow red. The real file would appear, projected behind him. The timestamp, the forged signature, the evidence of fraud, all of it illuminated for the world to see. No shouting, no revenge. Just light. 2 nights before the gala, Adrian stopped by once more. He placed a new stethoscope on my desk, identical to the one from decades ago. "The old one's cracked," he said. "This one works." I picked it up, the weight familiar. "You kept the design. Some things don't need improving," he said. "They just need to be heard again." I smiled, pressing the chess piece lightly against my own heart. The rhythmic thump-thump filled my ears. That's the sound of someone coming back to life. When he left, I stood alone in the studio, surrounded by glass, light, and silence. Outside, the city pulsed with sirens and distant thunder, the same rhythm echoing inside my ribs. The painting gleamed under the lamp, alive, defiant, waiting. Everything was ready. All that remained was the unveiling. And this time, the truth wouldn't whisper. It would shine. The St. Grace Charity Gala glittered like an operating theater pretending to be a ballroom. White light, silver tablecloths, a heartbeat of applause every time a donor walked in. On stage, the hospital's logo gleamed above a banner that read, "Healing through hope, hope." The word tasted metallic in my mouth. I stood backstage, hidden behind the velvet curtain, watching Ethan adjust his cufflinks in the reflection of the teleprompter. He looked immaculate, his suit pressed, his charm rehearsed. Around him, people smiled the way people do when they think goodness wears a tuxedo. Beside me, Adrian whispered, "You still have time to back out." "I've waited 25 years to step into the light," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." He nodded once, slipped a USB drive into his pocket, and moved toward the tech booth. The plan was already in motion. The ballroom dimmed. The host's voice echoed through the speakers. "Please welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Ethan Wren, founder of the Wren Foundation for Mental Health. Applause swelled like anesthesia. Soft, numbing. Ethan walked to the podium, smiling with practiced humility. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "Tonight, we gather not only to raise funds, but to honor the unseen battles behind every act of creation. My wife Clara taught me that art can be both a gift and a wound." He paused, letting the audience hum with sympathy. "She's an extraordinary artist, but she struggled. I've watched her sacrifice everything, her health, her peace for beauty. That's why I've dedicated this foundation to helping those like her, who suffer silently in the name of inspiration." Every word landed like a scalpel. The crowd nodded, clinking glasses, murmuring how noble. I felt my pulse quicken, the rhythm of the glass painting. Pulse, echoing behind the curtain, waiting. He continued, voice thick with self-congratulation. "Tonight, I'd like to share a story of love and perseverance. The story of a man who stood by his wife through every trial." That was my cue. I stepped onto the stage. My heels clicked once, twice, the sound crisp enough to slice the applause in half. "If you're going to tell a story about sacrifice," I said, my voice clear over the mic, "at least let it have the right name." The room froze. Ethan turned, his practiced smile faltering. "Clara, what are you doing?" "Finishing your sentence," I said. I gestured toward the massive drape covering the main exhibit. The stage lights dimmed to a single spotlight, sharp and white. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "my husband speaks of healing. Let me show you what healing looks like when it tells the truth." I pulled the cord. The curtain fell. Gasps rippled through the audience. The glass painting. Pulse stood tall under the lights, translucent and luminous. Beneath the surface, layered MRI scans of a human heart pulsed in slow, rhythmic waves. My heart, projected in motion. Every contraction glowed red, every pause silver. "This," I said, "is the art of restoration. A reconstruction from my own MRI, a record of what survived." The audience leaned forward, mesmerized. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the projection. Then, behind the image, another light flickered to life. Adrian's cue. The hospital logo appeared on the screen, followed by a document. Patient file. Clara Wren. Line by line, the words scrolled upward, the real report, digitally verified and timestamped. No mention of psychiatric treatment. No acute emotional dysregulation. And then, beside it, the forged version. The one bearing Adrian's falsified signature. The difference was unmistakable. "This," I continued, "is what my husband calls care. A lie printed on hospital paper, designed to erase a woman and call it protection." A murmur surged through the crowd. People turned, whispering, eyes darting from me to Ethan to the screen. Ethan's voice broke through the noise. "That's outrageous. Clara, you don't know what you're saying." "Don't I?" said. "You told the world I was broken. You told them I was sick, like in Tashin." I turned to the audience. "He even forged a doctor's signature to make sure the story sounded believable." Ethan slammed a hand on the podium. "That's a lie." Adrian stepped onto the stage, calm as a heartbeat. The crowd parted for him like water. He held up a folder. "I'm Dr. Adrian Hale," he said. "The attending physician listed on that document. And I can confirm publicly, what you've seen tonight is not my signature. The seal and the metadata have been tampered with. Mrs. Wren's medical record shows no psychological diagnosis whatsoever." The audience erupted in whispers. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. Ethan's face drained of color. You can't just hijack this event." "No," I said, stepping closer to him. "Lee, you hijacked my life. I'm just reclaiming the microphone." He tried to laugh, a hollow sound. "Clara, you're humiliating yourself." "No," I said softly. "I'm healing myself." I moved toward Pulse, placing my hand over the glowing heart. "You always said I needed treatment. You were right, and tonight I finished it." The room went silent again. "Because the disease," I said, meeting his eyes, "was you." The silence shattered gasps, camera clicks, murmured disbelief. Someone from the press shouted. "Mrs. Wren, is this true?" Another yelled. "Dr. Hale, will the hospital investigate?" Ethan stumbled backward, his confidence collapsing. The host tried to cut the lights, but Adrian signaled the technicians, "Keep them on." The projection stayed. The proof stayed. The truth stayed. Ethan turned to me, voice shaking. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes," I said. "I've restored the record." He lunged toward the microphone, desperate now. "She's unstable. This is exactly what I was talking about." The crowd recoiled. The desperation in his voice made him small, almost pitiful. I stepped aside, letting the light hit him full in the face. "Look closely," I said to the audience. "This is what manipulation looks like when you turn the lights on." Adrian moved to stand between us, not as protector, but as witness. "This event was supposed to honor healing," he said. "Instead, it revealed a sickness we all ignore. The way we doubt women's sanity when their truth becomes inconvenient." The applause started slowly from the back rows first, hesitant but real. Then louder, stronger, building until the entire hall was standing. Ethan backed away, eyes darting, his voice swallowed by the sound. "You think this changes anything?" he shouted. "You'll still lose everything." I smiled. Everything except myself. The lights dimmed again, shifting to red and gold. On the glass canvas, the pulse quickened faster now, like adrenaline. The heart shimmered, defiant. I turned to the audience one last time. "They call what I did reckless. I call it restoration. Every woman in this room has a file somewhere, written by someone else, signed without her consent. The good night, I rewrote mine." The applause became thunder. Flashbulbs erupted like sparks. Ethan stumbled off stage, a man unmade. "Yeah." I didn't follow him. I stood there with Adrian, both of us facing the glowing heart suspended in glass. He leaned toward me, voice low. "You did it." "No," I said. "We did it." He shook his head. "No, Clara. You just reminded the world that truth has a pulse." Later, after the crowd dispersed, I stood alone on the empty stage. The smell of champagne and ozone lingered. Reporters' questions still echoed faintly through the corridor. I touched the edge of the glass one last time. My reflection overlapped with the illuminated heart. 2 pulses, 1 body. I remembered Ethan's voice, years ago, whispering, "You owe me everything." And I whispered back, finally free, debt paid. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. Cameras still flashed in the distance, but they no longer frightened me. I walked past the marble steps, down to the street where the city lights flickered like constellations. For the first time in decades, I could hear my own heartbeat clearly. Steady, unapologetic, alive. I left the hospital that night long after the last camera flash had dimmed, after the press vans had rolled away, after the echoes of applause had dissolved into rain. The corridors were empty now. The marble floors glowed faintly under the emergency lights, like a stage after the actors have gone. I walked slowly, each step steady, my heels tapping the rhythm of something new, quiet, deliberate, alive. In my pocket, the stethoscope Adrian had given me rattled softly, the metal chest piece brushing against the rim of my keys. The sound was faint, click, click, but it felt like a new heartbeat, fragile and certain. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting. The parking lot shimmered with puddles that mirrored the hospital's neon sign. St. Grace. Healing through hope. I almost laughed. Hope had never come from buildings or banners. It came from the moment I stopped needing permission to breathe. I didn't go home that night. The word home had lost its meaning somewhere between the lies and the light. Instead, I drove to my studio. The street was empty, the windows dark. When I unlocked the door, the scent of linseed oil and dust welcomed me like an old friend. The painting pulse was still there, leaning against the wall, the faint glow of its heart reflected in the puddle of moonlight on the floor. I sat down in front of it. For the first time, I didn't see a battlefield or a wound. I saw endurance, something that had survived the fire, the lies, the diagnosis, and the applause. On the workbench beside me, the old stethoscope, the one Ethan had thrown, dented and cold, lay next to the new one. Two halves of a life. One broken, one unafraid. I picked up the dented one and traced the curve of the metal with my thumb. It no longer felt like a weapon from the past. It felt like a relic that had finally fulfilled its purpose. I whispered to it, half smiling, "You've done your job. You heard everything that needed hearing." Then I hung it on the wall, right above the painting. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a frame for what came after. The city outside was still awake, sirens in the distance, wind moving through the alleyways. But inside the studio, the air was perfectly still. I took a deep breath and realized, with something close to wonder, that I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Ethan, not even at myself. Hate had been a form of gravity. It kept me tethered to the wreckage. Letting it go felt like stepping into weightlessness. I turned on the small desk lamp, opened my sketchbook, and began to draw. Not commissions, not restorations, just lines that had no purpose except to exist. Each stroke felt like exhaling. I wasn't fixing anything tonight. I was letting things stay cracked, imperfect, unfinished. Because maybe, for once, that was enough. Sometime near dawn, I heard footsteps outside. Adrian stood in the doorway, still in his hospital scrubs, his hair damp from the rain. "You're still here," he said quietly. "So are you." He smiled faintly and stepped inside, glancing at Pulse. "They'll talk about that piece for years." "Let them," I said. For me, it was just a diagnosis. "And what's the result?" I looked at him, then at the painting, the heart glowing faintly behind the glass. "Stable," I said. "Finally stable." He laughed under his breath, the sound low and kind. "You should sleep," he said. "You've been running on adrenaline for days." "I don't want to sleep," I said. "I want to remember this feeling before it fades, the quiet after the noise." He nodded, understanding without needing to reply. Before he left, he handed me something small. A folded slip of paper. "It's your clean record," he said. "The official copy. No edits, no stamps, no lies." I held it for a moment, then folded it again and slid it into the back of my sketchbook. "Let it stay there," I said. "The truth doesn't need framing anymore." He smiled, squeezed my shoulder gently, and left. When the door closed, I turned back to Pulse. The first rays of sunrise slipped through the blinds, breaking across the glass like veins of light. The heart shimmered once more, then dimmed as the room brightened. I thought about everything I had lost, my reputation, my marriage, my certainty, and realized none of it mattered as much as this single astonishing fact. I was still here, still breathing, still able to hear my own rhythm without anyone translating it for me. I pulled the stethoscope from my pocket, the new one. I placed the chest piece against my chest, closed my eyes, and listened. The sound came steady, patient, strong. Not heroic, not dramatic, just real. For years, my heart had been an echo of other people's expectations. Now, it was a song I recognized. "I don't want to hate anymore," I whispered into the dawn. "I just want to restore myself, piece by piece, until the cracks form a pattern I can live with." When the sun finally rose, spilling gold across the studio walls, it lit the words I had once engraved on the back of the painting frame. "Listen to your own pulse." I smiled, reached for my brush, and began again. This time, not to repair, but to create. 1 year later, I opened the doors of Pulse Revival Studio. It wasn't large, just a converted warehouse in the quiet part of town, where the air smelled faintly of metal and rain. But sunlight spilled through the high windows every morning, landing on rows of easels and glass panels that shimmered like lungs breathing in light. Here, I taught women how to restore what the world had told them was beyond repair. Not ancient canvases, not saints or portraits, but pieces of themselves. The classes filled quickly. Women arrived from everywhere. Divorcees, widows, survivors of surgeries and scandals. Some had never painted before. Some had forgotten why they ever stopped. They brought X-rays of fractured bones, MRI scans of hearts, CT prints of spines once broken. I showed them how to turn those images into layers of color and light, how to reimagine a scar as a map, a wound as texture, a pulse as proof that something had refused to quit. We worked quietly, often without music, letting the hum of brushes and breath become its own rhythm. On the front wall hung the only decoration in the room, my old stethoscope, now plated in gold. The tubing still curved like a question mark, the chest piece glinting softly under the light. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "Listen to your own pulse." It had become our studio's creed. Some mornings, when the students arrived early, they would pause to look at it. I could always tell when someone was seeing it for the first time. The way they tilted their heads slightly, the way their eyes softened, as if realizing it was not a symbol of medicine, but of mercy. One woman, a breast cancer survivor named Leona, once asked, "Is that real?" "A real stethoscope?" "Yes," I said. "It used to belong to someone who thought my heart needed fixing." "And now?" "Now it listens, not diagnoses." She smiled. "I think I'd like to borrow that idea." Every Friday afternoon, after class ended, I walked the aisles between the tables, checking the progress of each piece. There was something holy about those works. In progress, glass sheets glowing from beneath, paint bleeding into images of ribs, spines, arteries. Every panel was a confession, every brushstroke an act of forgiveness. I kept one student's words pinned above my desk. "The day I stopped hiding my scar was the day it healed." One rainy evening, I stayed late to clean the studio. The smells of turpentine and rain mixed in the air, that strange perfume of beginnings. From the radio came a faint news segment. "The Wren Foundation officially dissolves today after a federal investigation into document falsification." Former director Ethan Wren declined to comment. I didn't stop to listen further. I just turned off the radio. Justice had never been my goal. Clarity had. And now that the fog was gone, I had no interest in the ruins left behind. When the storm passed, one of my students, a shy woman named Marianne, her hands still trembling from years of living with someone who silenced her, approached me as I was locking up. "Ms. Wren?" she asked, hesitating. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you still get scared? Of hospitals, or doctors, or men like him?" I smiled, surprised by how gently the answer came. "No," I said. "I'm not afraid of doctors anymore. I'm only afraid of forgetting my own rhythm." She looked puzzled at first, then nodded slowly, as if she understood that I wasn't just talking about heartbeats. At night, when the last student left and the studio fell quiet, I sometimes turned off all the lights except one, the one over Pulse, the glass painting that had exposed everything. It hung now in the center of the room, no longer a weapon, just light suspended in color. When the city went dark outside, its faint red glow illuminated the words on the plaque beneath the stethoscope. There were evenings when I would sit in front of it, not to remember, but to make sure I never forgot. Adrian visited occasionally, usually unannounced, always carrying something. A stack of donated medical images for the students to use, a box of fresh brushes, a bag of tea. He never stayed long. We had learned the grace of silence between survivors. One day, he stood before Pulse and said quietly, "You know, I think it's breathing." "Maybe it always was," I said. He smiled and handed me a folder. Inside was a photograph of the chapel where we'd once met as kids, the St. Grace fresco now fully restored. The cracks were visible, but they shimmered like veins of gold. "We decided not to cover them," he said. "They make it stronger." I nodded, feeling tears press at the edge of my eyes. That's what healing really is, isn't it? Not erasing what happened, but engraving it in gold. "Exactly," he said. "Restoration, not replacement." After he left, I stood in front of the students' works drying along the wall. Each painting told a different story, some messy, some luminous. But all of them pulsed faintly under the light. I thought of the version of myself that once stood in a hospital hallway, trembling, half believing she was crazy because someone else said she was. She was gone now. Or maybe not gone, just absorbed, layered beneath the new paint, like an underdrawing you no longer need to trace. Sometimes journalists came to interview me. They always asked the same question: "What inspired you to start Pulse Revival Studio?" And I always gave the same answer, though it meant something different every time I said it. A misdiagnosis. They would laugh politely, not understanding that I meant it literally. One afternoon, a young girl, barely 20, interning for an arts magazine, lingered after class. She'd been quiet the whole semester, her paintings tentative, her eyes always darting toward the floor. That day, she approached the golden stethoscope on the wall. "Can I try it?" she asked. "Of course," I said. She placed it against her chest, eyes closed, and smiled through tears. "It's louder than I thought," she whispered. I nodded. The heart always is. The world just teaches us to keep turning down the volume. When everyone left, I locked up and stepped outside. The sun was setting, painting the street in amber and copper. Across the road, a bakery was closing, the smell of bread mixing with the cool wind. I stood there for a long time, letting the city's noise wash over me. The laughter, the horns, the footsteps, all of it alive, all of it rhythmic. I realized that I no longer needed the studio, or the plaque, or even the stethoscope to remind me. The world itself was one giant heartbeat, steady and unashamed. Before leaving, I turned back to look through the window. The studio glowed softly inside. The words on the wall catching the last light of day, "Listen to your own pulse." I whispered the phrase under my breath, almost like a prayer. Then I locked the door and walked into the evening, not away from anything, but toward everything I'd finally learned to feel. And somewhere between the rhythm of my steps and the echo of my breath, I realized I was free. The studio was quiet when they came to film. Just me, a single camera, and the golden stethoscope glinting faintly on the wall behind. The crew asked for silence before the take. The red light blinked on. I looked straight into the lens. For a moment, I saw my reflection in it. Older, steadier, no longer the woman who once trembled in hospital corridors. Just a woman who had learned to listen. I smiled, not for show, but because it felt like breathing. Then I began. If one day you find yourself face to face with the person who once broke your heart, maybe in a hospital, maybe in another life, don't run. I paused. The air in the studio thickened with that small, sacred silence that comes before truth. He might not be back to save you. Maybe he's there so you can finally realize you never died. The cameraman didn't move. Even the light seemed to hold its breath. I thought of all the women who might be watching on the other side of that lens. The ones who had been told they were unstable, too emotional, too much. The ones who'd been called patients when all they needed was to be believed. They said I was broken, I continued, voice steady. But broken isn't the end. Sometimes, it's the only way light knows where to enter. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, loud, certain. I'm not here to tell you to forgive the people who hurt you. I'm just asking you to listen to the sound underneath the noise. The one that says you're still here. Behind the camera, one of the assistants blinked hard, her eyes glistening. She thought I didn't notice, but I did. "You don't need a doctor to tell you you're alive," I said softly. "You just need to hear it for yourself." I leaned slightly forward, closing the distance between truth and whoever needed it. "So share this story. Not because it's mine, but because it might belong to someone you love, someone who forgot how to listen." I nodded toward the golden stethoscope behind me. "Tell her there are heartbeats that don't need to be diagnosed. Only heard." There was a pause, the kind that feels like prayer. And then I gave them the last line. The one I had rehearsed in silence, every night, until it felt like it belonged not to a script, but to a pulse. "My story closes here," I said quietly, "but maybe, just maybe, it's the first heartbeat of your freedom." The light on the camera blinked off. The room exhaled. No applause. No music. Just the soft, steady sound of breathing. Mine, the crew's, and the world's somewhere beyond.